Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and a warm welcome to all of you joining us from locations all around the world. My name is Donna de Weert-Wilson. I'm the executive publisher responsible for the subject area of neuroscience and the journal Brain Research at Elsevier. I will be acting as moderator for this panel discussion today, which features 5 distinguished editors of the Brain Research editorial board, who have very kindly agreed to share their perspectives as women in neuroscience. With this webinar, we pay tribute to both Women in Science Day on February the 11th and International Women's Day coming up on March 8th. The panel discussion is led by Deputy Editor-in-Chief, Dr. Susan Ravizza, and she's joined by 4 fellow Brain Research editors, Dr. Heather B. Monty Nelson, Dr. Simona Lodato, Dr. Hui-Xuan Hong, Dr. Natasha Raja. The webinar will be about 1 hour long, of which the panel discussion will last around 30 minutes. There will be an opportunity for attendees to ask questions in the live Q&A session in the time remaining. I now hand it over to the panelists who will discuss their experience and development as neuroscientists, the importance of gender balance to the neuroscience field, diversity in the workplace, and improving opportunities for women's career advancement. Susan, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm excited to host this panel today. My name is Susan Ravizza. I am a professor in psychology and neuroscience at Michigan State University. So I'm going to go ahead and start the discussion by asking each panelist to give a brief introduction and explain why they became a neuroscientist. So maybe we could start with Dr. Huang.
Okay. So actually, when I was a graduate student, I'm kind of intimidated by neuroscience because I thought neuroscience is electrophysiologist and I'm not very good on biophysics. So I actually, that time I was working on like a molecular mechanism of how amino acid was metabolized in liver. Okay, but I think it's through the graduate study, I think the first time I realized I might be able to work on neuroscience is come with this conditional knockout. The LOSP, the first generally created by Joe Chen in Tanigawa's lab. So I thought, well, with this approach, I may be able to look at some kind of molecule and which are involved in learning and memory. And I think people have known for long-term memory formation, you need a new gene transcription and translation. So at that time, I just thought, now I can use my molecular approach to do learning and memory study. I think that's the time I start to, want to become neuroscientist. And because I think I have, just think that that's something I can do. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds great. Dr. Raja?
So I wasn't sure I wanted to be a neuroscientist until the end of my undergrad. So I was in psychology at the University of Toronto, and I really found it fascinating thinking about how the mind constructs individuals' realities and how for some people they develop into getting some sort of mental illness and other people do not. And so it really was mental health kind of got me interested in neuroscience. And I first started working with animal models of anxiety in my undergrad program. And then I learned that rats don't like me and I don't like rats. So I ended up approaching the chair of my department and asking if there was another way I could continue in neuroscience. And she had informed me that my PhD supervisor, ended up being my PhD supervisor, was coming from the United States, Randy McIntosh, to start a PET program at the University of Toronto looking at learning and memory. And so I took that opportunity in my undergrad to learn about PET imaging, and I fell in love with brain imaging. And I really liked both the computational aspects. It allowed you to look at mathematical models and also being able to look in human beings. How are they learning? How are they remembering different stimuli? And so that's what got me into neuroscience.
Wow, even PET imaging.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about Dr. Monty Nelson next?
Hi, sure. Thank you. So I did not have much research experience as an undergrad. I did some work with fiddler crabs and sensory perception. And I really liked learning about the way that the brain communicates across its different regions. And I really had this interest in understanding the balance of the way that neurotransmitters, hormones, how, the body's always striving for homeostasis. And it just was so interesting to me how smart the systems were. And that led me, of course, to the path of endocrinology, where we know there's, positive and negative loops everywhere that are trying to regulate a system for a particular need. So when I started graduate school, I was in the lab of Victor Denenberg, and we were doing work studying sexual differentiation of the brain. And that's where I learned that the traditional model holds the tenet that the female brain development is actually by default, and that the male brain is actively masculinized. Well, that is not true. And we know now that the brain is actively feminized, just like the male brain is actively masculinized. So a female brain is not a male brain without hormones. So that got me really excited about women's health work. This was all in the rat model. And I decided I wanted to do aging and menopause because it brought together this huge complexity of memory and cognition. And that's important, I think, because that's our autobiographical self that makes us who we are. And of course, during aging, we've got menopause and hormone change. And there's a lifetime of exposure of hormones that are going to impact the way the brain responds during older age. And when I dug into what literature there just wasn't a lot. The Women's Health Initiative was coming out at that time, of course, which was very informative and told us a lot about where to go next. And that led me to the path of neuroscience. So I do behavioral neuroendocrinology, and my ultimate goal is to use animal models and the strict control that we have over their environment and their hormone exposures to understand the trajectories of menopause and how different hormone therapies can optimize that trajectory for women.
Great. And Dr. Lodato.
Yeah, thank you. I have to confess, I didn't start loving neurosciences first. I was actually during my undergrad study really taken by developmental biology, which was something really that amazed me, how, from one cell you can get such complex and diversified organism, and the time scale would be so different among, species that are, vertebrates, for example, and invertebrates were so exciting. You could follow their development. And then, almost in parallel, I started following some classes of neurobio and psychobio, which were just astonishing, I have to say. It really made an impact. And that's what the moment when I thought, why not doing two things that really, really excite me together. So this was really the time when I went to in developmental neurobiology, and this provided a whole new world to me, a world of questions, inexplored, impossibly, even technically somehow to address, for all how the development occurs, and the amazing challenge of decoding how from a tube, basically, of neuroepithelial cells, we can get to the complexity of the brain that you guys have described. And following my path, I started my PhD in molecular neurobiology in Michel Studer lab. And then I moved to Harvard in the lab of Professor Paola Arlotta, where I had the opportunity to learn how to dissect both at the cellular and molecular level, isolating the cells. So we could finally take these cells out of the brain along their development, of course, in animal models. But, these became even thinkable in from human tissue, and then the frontier of even making human brain organoids in a lab and following neurodevelopment, human neurodevelopment, of certain aspect at least in the lab. And this, it's really what drives me every day, the excitement of the knowledge, the unforeseen development is really a big drive for becoming part of the community for neurodevelopment. Yeah.
Everyone's story seems so well reasoned and why they went into neuroscience. My story is that I was getting a master's in communications, and I saw this movie Awakenings about the famous neurologist, Dr. Oliver Sacks, and I thought, I want to do that. So I took a break actually for a couple of years after getting my master's in communication, somehow convinced Berkeley to let me into their psychology program and started working with cerebellar patients and aphasic patients. And I just was so interested in how the brain supported all these functions that, and in sometimes mysterious ways. So, okay, so I wanted to ask Dr. Huang and Dr. Raja, what kinds of support did you receive or not receive towards advancing your career goals? So let's start with Dr. Raja this time.
Thanks. I was very fortunate because I had a lot of support as far as the technical and the learning aspect of the science. So my PhD mentor, my postdoc mentors, they were very supportive. They provided all the necessary resources to do the kind of science I was interested in. I think probably, and not to their fault, I think it was a lack of awareness in our culture earlier on, but I'm not from a traditional academic family. So understanding what goes on behind the scenes in academia, it was probably what I didn't get mentorship on, probably because people didn't know I needed the mentorship in some ways. A lot of people in academia are from academic families or from professional families, and I was the first person to do a PhD in my family. And so learning just the background of how do you navigate, what's the timeline for things, how do I network with people, not to be shy about introducing myself to other people in group environments. And and seeing, one thing I learned, and I tell my trainees now, is that your peers are your future collaborators. So establish these type of networks among your peer group now, like during graduate school, because that will carry you forward. And take part in events, even though it might not be directly related to your project. It's a way of getting out of your comfort zone and meeting other people and kind of getting known and getting to know other people, which is something I think wasn't obviously kind of taught to me when I was in graduate school. And it's probably because of, I'm now I'm now way older, so the times have changed. And so I don't think that was on the forefront of academics. It was kind of just teach the techniques and teach the thinking was probably the approach back then. Whereas now we're learning that networking is very important, and getting the soft skills of academia is very important as well.
Yeah, I think I would have appreciated that as well. I was always like, I don't want to bother anyone. I didn't go out and actively seek information. So yeah, I think some training on how to network and mingle at conferences and introduce yourself would have been good. Dr. Huang.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think networking is also difficult for me. And first, of course, it's my personality, probably not very sociable person. And second, also because when I did my postdoc, I do have a hard time finding a good neuroscience lab because I don't have a neuroscience training background. So I end up like joined the Joe Richter's lab. And at that time, his lab is working on translational regulation in early development. But we realized how important translational control is in learning and memory. So that's why we moved to the neuroscience. So I guess when I joined the lab, of course, we're not really considered a real neuroscience lab. So when you go to the meeting, you kind of not like a typical neuroscience group. They have their whole history of the family. They all get reunion together in the SFN, this big meeting. But I usually don't get that. But I think to go into the meeting, you actually get to know someone you have not known before. Like I know the Eric Klein, and he's the one introduced me to Matt and to join this editorial board, and which I think is kind of to me it's a new thing. Is to be an editor, I never have thought about that. And so I decided to take the duty and see what the editor is about. So I think I'm quite fortunate. I have some of the person I met in the meeting, and they also kind of helped me to grow in the field. And so, I think that support is quite important. And the other support I want to say, at least for my career, I think the core animal center, which I got when I returned to Taiwan, we have pretty good transgenic core and to generate the knockout or transgenic mice for you and at a reasonable cost. And I think that's also important for me to advance to look at some what kind of gene is important for learning and memory or for brain development. So I think that's a support I got. In terms of support I did not get, I don't know whether we're talking about this kind of experimental things. I think the funding here usually is kind of limited. So with now I feel there's a lot of omics study, all the transcriptome and proteomics, that kind of study. So sometimes they kind of limit your approach because the funding issue. Yeah. Other than that, I think in general, we're quite well supported by college. If we have a question, we can reach out. Yeah. But I guess in academic in general, at least in my generation, I don't know, with the younger generation now we teach a student, we also say we have to teach them how to write a proposal, how to write a grant, or how to write a resume or looking for a job. But I guess that my time, we never have this kind of training. So I think now people incorporate this to kind of teach the younger generation how to become the faculty, maybe, or seek the opportunity in other career. Yeah.
Yeah, running a lab is really like being a small business manager, and you don't really get a lot of training on how to manage everything, manage people, manage budgets. You're just kind of thrown in the deep end, to figure it out.
Right.
Anyone have anything to add to that?
I just want to.
I do. Oh, I'm so sorry. You go.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think one of the things that has grown a lot in the field of neuroscience is teaching our graduate students how to mentor. And I think that has really helped, especially women graduate students, to empower them to use their voice and take leadership and teaching opportunities to the next level. And I think that I think has been really, really a critical thing that I've seen that's increased throughout my 20 years in doing neuroscience.
That's positive.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that my perception of this type of change is that also reflects, of course, what we see in society. It's really on the point of awareness. I feel like I was fortunate enough always to be mentored by, I have to say, always women that were my mentors in my path, and probably it was not by chance. But I think it's when I started, I probably was just one of the lucky person to get someone that had a good mentoring attitude. But now it's becoming explicit in our role to be a good mentor from the beginning at every stage. So when I started my assistant professorship, it was clear to me that I was going to look for mentoring within the institute. And myself, I tried to be a mentor for the people in my lab. And it was on my to-do list as soon as I started, as one of my accomplishments. And it's true that at some point in your career, you don't, it's not only, I feel like, a cultural and a social duty. It's also that at some point in your career, you will be judged not only by papers, by contribution, but also by your legacy. And this is becoming more and more evident, I think, in neuroscience. It was probably more evident in other type of science earlier, but I have the feeling that neuroscience always takes a while to pick up on certain topic. I also believe that it's part of our duty, also since we study the brain. It's part of the growing of a person, the mentoring part. There's no parenting without mentoring. It's not feeding only or paying salaries. Definitely, taking care of their growth.
As an assistant professor, are you getting mentoring from more senior faculty?
I am, yeah. I have, in Italy, there are not specific paths as there are in the States. I mean, I was lucky enough to to join Paola's lab when she was starting, and at Harvard, it was very rigid, I should say rather rigid structure path. She had constant meetings, she had, follow up, and her deadlines were really tight. And I knew this was going to be the case if I had joined an American institution as well when I got my offer. But when we decided to come back to Italy, I knew this was not already so structured in Italy. But nevertheless, I could, definitely reach out to, I have to say, two women full professor again. Now that I'm speaking out loud, I realize this is a pattern that have always been available to me for any question, any opportunity, advices for grants. And, despite the fact, I feel that the environment is always welcoming this type of mentoring, despite the fact that it might not be structured already. But things are changing. I can definitely think that things have changed since I left the country more than 10 years ago, and then and now that I came back, I can see the process. Yeah.
Can I add something? Oh,
yeah.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So I was the director of the Brain Imaging Center at the Douglas for 10 years, and so when I took that role on, and I was an associate professor, but non-tenured at that point. I got tenured a year later, but when I started, I was sat down by a senior woman, and she gave me amazing advice. She's like, you need to surround yourself with people you could turn to for advice and go build your mentorship network, right? So not just individuals that you work with directly, but people that you kind of respect in the community, and reach out to them. Don't be shy and say, it would be great to have someone, a sounding board, when you have thoughts or, anything comes up that you need advice from. And I think that was a phenomenal piece of advice that it never kind of occurred to me to reach out, because I think I'm naturally a bit shy. So I didn't want to put anyone out by asking them for help, but that was great advice, because that, I think having peer mentorship throughout your academic career is so essential.
I think it's also important that, in my case at least, I always feel I can reach out to people that were in my previous circle. It's not only where I'm standing right now, but also I know I can reach out to Paola if I need anything, if I need an advice. I know she would be there for me. And she has been, despite how busy she can be, she has been there for all the people that have left their lab, independent of the career choice. So I think this is really something that, make your mind at peace. We know we all struggle at this phases, and you're not alone. And there are people that have gone through it and are willing to support you. So I think this makes my life much easier. Sometimes even just to vent out on something that is frustrating, it's really a great opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, I do see the field turning to really support mentorship. I know for my annual reviews, I have to fill out tons of information, publications and so on, but I also have to give examples of how I've mentored other people. So I think that at least in the States seems to be a big push to get people more mentorship throughout the whole career, not just as a graduate student, but as assistant professor, associate professor. And so
I think there's been a lot of discussion about the idea that we really need to take into account the mentoring roles and how important they are, because when you look at the numbers and the evidence, women spend a lot more time mentoring. And what that means, it's all a balance, right? Something's got to go. So if that means, fewer numbers that are traditionally counted into success as you move through different promotional stages, those tenets and ideas, I think, really need to be revised. And I think a lot of universities are doing that, where mentoring really counts, and it's recognized that we really need the sustained change in the attitude of what equals success for neuroscience. And I think really any neuroscience field, where we're talking about wanting this next generation to speak up and to use their voice and to recognize that somebody else's success doesn't take away from our success. This is, we should be cheerleaders for each other. And I think there's been a lot of growth in that area, I've noticed, especially from woman to woman. And the other thing that I think is really changing is that recognition of a person's whole self, that it's okay for us to discuss, during our reviews. It was COVID. I have 2 kids at home, and, this is part of who I am. I can be a really great scientist and a really great mom at the same time. And I think opening that dialogue and normalizing that balance is not a negative thing, it's just not. And my working hours might be different than somebody else's. And in fact, at the bottom of my email, I say that my working hours might not be the same as yours. And I do dinner with my kids. I have 2 teenage daughters. And, after that, I am a better writer at night for some reason. So, a lot of times I'm responding to emails at midnight, and I don't want them to think that just because that's my time, that doesn't mean that they have to be up that late. And I don't want them to, I've had grad students say that, for example, that are getting married, say, well, I don't really have time to go on a honeymoon. And I'm like, yes, you do. Go for a week. You're going to be a better scientist when you come back, because that you can balance, and I think we have to model that behavior.
Yeah.
I think it's critically important. I do it.
Thanks God was not the delivery, Heather. Honeymoon. Thanks God was not the delivery. It was just the honeymoon.
Yeah, well, that's right. I think that part of this is this idea of, for example, an individual, women and men, who are moms and dads, saying things like, well, I have an off-campus appointment, when really you're going to your kid's soccer game. I think that I will say to my students, other faculty around me, my daughter has her fall festival and I'm the parent mom that day. So I'm going in to help my 3rd graders carve pumpkins from her class. So, we'll have to, schedule your data meeting for the next day if you like, or the day before, but that day's blocked off. And I send pictures to them, and I show pictures at lab meeting and things like that. And I think we have to normalize it, because especially women are getting burnt out And we're never going to see that growth in leadership roles unless we give that perspective that it really does make, I'm a better scientist. It makes you a better scientist when you're balancing.
So do you
That's
think
my view.
this more like work-life balance is a product that gender diversity is becoming more balanced in institutions as well? So do you think this is a product of having more women in leadership roles at universities and academic institutions?
Maybe. I still hear a lot of women mentioning they don't want to have kids until they're tenured and things like that. So I think our younger generations, our newer assistant professors and our postdocs and our graduate students, I think we really need to model that behavior for them. And I think, for example, some of the more administrative roles I have no interest in, and I'm open about that. I don't want to do that kind of leadership role because I have one daughter who's a senior in high school and another one who's a sophomore, and I only have them for a couple more years, and I like them. I want to hang out with them, and I don't want, I want to be home for dinner.
Even as teenagers?
Yeah, right. That's true. Some days. But
I think we're getting the wrap-up message. So before we go, I just wanted to ask if anyone has good ideas for how to improve career advancement opportunities for women in neuroscience. I know Brain Research has been trying to increase the gender balance of its editorial board and recruiting editors around the globe, but could you think of any other ways to advance career opportunities for women in neuroscience?
I think it does have to come from the top down to some degree. Like what Brain Research is doing is great to establish gender balance, and has to just, this is what we're going to do moving forward. I also think within brain imaging and data science kind of fields, to educate women on like other career paths. I think in academia, we only think of the academic path, and not all students enjoy that path or they want to go a different path. And so I think one thing I do is I try and share as many kind of talk series that are coming up, or educational, like industry sponsored events. So, if a student's curious, they could go and they could learn, and I'll try my best to mentor them, or at least try and get them in touch with someone in industry that could mentor them better along that path. And so I think just opening the conversation that you don't have to stay in academia, it's completely respectful, and we encourage you to go into industry if that's what you want to do. And so just opening up what type of opportunities are there for women, so they don't think, I think sometimes they see the academic path as, oh, you have to write all these grants and then you have to sweat to do tenure, and it seems like, how do I have that work-life balance? And so first, to model it, like what Heather was saying, by having the work-life balance yourself and showing that this is good for your science and this is good for your health, but also giving them opportunities to explore other avenues that might interest them. So I think there's that. And another thing I do with my women in neuroscience in my lab is I make sure we do talk about what their interests are, who they are as a person, right? And the men as well. It's like, who are you as a person? What will fulfill you? So part of, in Canada, we have the CIHR, which is our parallel of the NIH, and they actually have a really great series of slides and advice for mentors on how you should have these regular meetings once a month with your trainees to find out what their career path is and what they want to establish, and kind of get a very defined timeline for them to achieve that. And so I think having those kind of resources for mentors and then sharing that with your mentees really helps.
If I may just add one thing, I go back to the concept of awareness. I think biases, and has been shown, also scientifically, and we could say that are part of our life. We all have, cultural bias and ethical ethnic bias. I think it's, the gender bias might be somewhere embedded, even if we don't think it's there in our reasoning. The only way to push these boundaries is to, for me at least, is to become aware of that. So what I try to do with my people, girls or boys or, women or men that they are, and I do myself as well, and I constantly do with my husband, poor victim of this, is the lab rat of the house, is constantly posing the question, why was this expression used in this context? Did you really think about it? It was just more a gut expression that you use because it's somewhere in the back of your mind encoded as a bias, and then the moment you see it, then you're able to destroy it, to at least to work on it. But if it's not acknowledged, it's very, very difficult to even start thinking about it. So it's something, I'm a mother of 2 boys. This is really, really my mission beyond my mission in science, is, to raise more aware, a newer generation of aware men in this topic. I think that's what we also need to address.
Yep.
I think the other thing I want to add on is sometimes you get the opportunity to do like extra work, like an editor or being the president or secretary of the society. And I think a lot of time for female faculty, I know it's like we try to balance family and work. So try not to do anything more than outside the lab. And I think sometimes I just think you have to be courageous. And I usually go to seek advice from my senior female faculty, see whether can I do this? You think I will be capable of balance my promotion and family and work, everything together? And I think usually a very successful senior female faculty, they can give me the advice I trust. And I tend to go to them for advice. And I think as each female faculty, when the opportunity comes, I think it's important for us to say yes, to maybe even take the leadership role. And I think that will encourage our younger generation, especially the female scientists, think that they can also do that. Yeah.
I think the timing of that, though, is really critically important, because I agree with you, but I also worry that I see a lot of women, especially more junior women, saying yes because the opportunity is there, and we should take advantage of those. But I think we can also make our own calls for what works for us.
Right.
And like, for example, I will say to myself, if I take on being the chair of this search committee, what has to go? Mm-hmm. So if, you know what I mean? So that means that I need to talk to my chair about possibly having a course release, or maybe I will remove myself from a particular committee for a certain amount of time, and that frees up time for me to do that. So I can say yes to that, or I ask that person, I'm on this committee that's really important to me, and that will be finished in June, so I can start in July. I think taking control over the timing, if you can, is really, really important. And I think people respect and appreciate that, so you can jump in with your heart fully in it.
Yeah, sometimes it's also a very good reason to get rid of the things you don't want to do.
Knowing when to say yes and when to say no.
I tell my students to find their passion and then find a way to make money doing it for their careers.
Well, thank you everyone for participating in the panel. This has been a great discussion. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So nice to meet you all. It's been a pleasure.
Same here.
Yeah.
So thank you, all 5 of you, for participating in the panel discussion today. I think we could have gone on for another couple of hours. We were just getting warmed up there. We're now going to stop the pre-recorded part of this webinar and switch over to the live session and start answering the questions from those who have joined us. So thank you all once again, and yeah, looking forward to the Q&A live next week. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and sincerest apologies for the technical difficulties that we were experiencing at the beginning of the webinar. I hope that most of you have been able to rejoin and pick up where we left off and listen to the main stint of the panel discussion. We've had some very interesting questions coming through, and I've started prioritizing them. We don't have all panelists with us today for the live session, but we do have an additional member from the Brain Research Board, our editor-in-chief, Professor Matt Lavoie. Thank you, Matt, for joining us. He's here to answer any of the difficult brain research editorial questions that you might want to throw at him. As are the other editors, if you have specific questions for them regarding submitting to the journal or any question related to the topic of the webinar. So I'm just going to put these questions out to the panelists, and jump in if you feel that you would like to answer them. So I'm going to start. Thank you for this grounding talk. As a very senior PhD student and as a woman, I feel it takes much more grit, perseverance, and a passion for brain research to continue to grow in this field and to pursue a career in academia. What would you say is your strongest personality trait that helped you through the hardships in your career? Any hands up for that one?
For me, I would say perseverance and being willing to take a risk, knowing that if the risk doesn't work out, it will be a learning tool. In the moment, it doesn't feel like that. When you feel like I failed at this, but I think with some of the bigger risks come the biggest successes. And another thing that I think is really important is encouraging and boosting other women and, really everybody around you. Somebody else's success doesn't take away from your success. So I think we really need to remember that it's not a competition. We're all out for the same goal. We want the truth in nature, right? That's what replicates. We want to do great science. As an editor, it's truly a joy to feel like I'm having even a small hand in making decisions about what's going out there to the field. So I think, taking into perspective where you want your time to go, being willing to take some risks about shuffling your time commitments, and giving up something if you're going to take something else on. And I do want to say, I think my weakest trait is that I really like my career, my job, being a professor and a mentor. So I want to say yes to everything. And that's hard, because I don't think of it really as a job. I just love it. But every yes takes away from something. Either it's my students, my kids, my husband, other work that I should be doing, there are times in the evening where I'm looking and going over the editorial things that I, want to do. And I also want to review my student's paper who's been sitting in my inbox longer than the responses that I've given for that as an editor, so it's about balance, I think, for me.
Yeah, I would
Thank
add,
you, Heather.
I would add to that, don't take yourself out of the competition. Not that it's a competition, but I'm sure all suffer from imposter syndrome. In graduate school, I remember thinking, all these people are smarter than me. I should just quit now. And I would just tell myself, if you feel that way at the end of the year, you can quit. but don't just quit because this day you feel inadequate. And by the end of the year, the pressure was off and I'd be like, oh, this is still kind of fun. I'll go for another year. So I tell all my students, if you're doing poorly, people will tell you. Don't take yourself and fire yourself because you think you're doing poorly. Just make them kick you out if they're going to kick you out.
I agree with everything. And for me, I think a lot of it was curiosity. I think staying forever curious is what is really important to stay in academia, and being patient. Learning patience is also key, and developing organizational skills. I think, that harebrained academic kind of image that people are given from their childhood really does us a disservice, because you need to be organized in order to achieve the balance that you want to achieve. And getting some help, like taking some courses on business administration and organization, really helped me. So I think those kind of things are important to balance things in academia and in your personal life as well.
So we're just going to run over a little bit longer because of the technical problems that we had at the beginning. If everybody's okay with that on the panel, hopefully our attendees will continue to listen in. I have a nice question here. What is your advice for female graduate students in STEM fields who come up against sexist treatment in the lab? For example, men not being held to the same expectations as women in the lab when it comes to laundry and cleaning, etc.
That's a tough one, because I know the natural tendency is to brush it off and to move on, because it's hard sometimes to deal with it. But the longer you brush it off and move on, the bigger of an issue it becomes, and you will develop resentment. And maybe the resentment will be imbalanced to what was originally asked of you. So my advice would be to, diplomatically and very politely just ask, what, oh, yeah, sure, but why am I being asked to do this? Maybe we could, or come up with an alternative. Oh, maybe we could have a duty list where everyone shares in this. And just that way, you help yourself, and you also often I think a lot of people do this unconsciously, and it's not like nasty, intentionally nasty. Sometimes it is, but often it's not. And so just giving the person the opportunity to reflect and realize, even silently, that, oh, that's right, I was being biased, and asking you to do that would be helpful.
I like the idea of, I agree with everything that you've said. And I like the idea of adding some kind of, list where people are assigned different things and these things rotate. I think that's really important. And I think if it keeps happening, I think calling it out is really, really important, because a lot of times these are, these microaggressions that people don't realize that they're doing. And, I think most people don't want to act that way or demean other people, so I think bringing it up and saying, I don't know if this is what you meant to say, but this is what I heard. And, I have data to do too, that kind of framework, and then, offer a solution. I think making this table is a great idea, and we each check it off when we're done, and it rotates. So I love that idea.
Sometimes it's hard to know if what you're being asked is unfair. So I remember as a first year assistant professor, an older faculty member asked me to get coffee for one of the speakers. And I was like, did he ask me because he thinks this is my gender role, or did I just happen to be around and he kind of just asked for favors all the time? So I did end up getting the coffee, but I still don't really know what I should have done in that situation. As an outside person is present, I don't want to be like, get it yourself, Why are you? So it's hard to know what to do in that. And he never asked me to do that again. But yeah, probably having a frank discussion with him would have been good after the fact, but yeah, I never did.
So here's a nice question that's related to being a journal editor. So not necessarily just to being a female in science, but also, you know, to all of you, to all four of you, including Matt. I wonder how to better prepare myself to be a science editor in graduate school. Any tips? Start reviewing?
Yep. I actually just got an email today from a professor who asked if their student could aid in the review. And I was thrilled about that. So, and I have my students do that as well, but I do get the editor's permission. And we go through the, you know, we each review separately, and then we go through and we make it one review and submit it. And I always, you know, first ask the editor if it's okay, because there's confidentiality, you know, there could be confidentiality issues. But I also, you know, I replied, and in fact, Matt and Susan, I CC'd you guys on that. And I said that, you know, I would also be very happy to send a thank you note or a formal letter telling the, you know, the student thank you, so that they can put that on their CV or have, you know, it's a big deal. This is our next generation. They need to know how to, you know, give feedback. So yeah, I think that's a huge part of it.
Yeah, I guess I would say that if you have interest in that direction, then I would start engaging with your mentor about how you can use individual papers that you may review in partnership with him or her on an individual paper, but then just engage in broader discussions. What if this was a different journal? What if they excluded this experiment? So you can start to think about how to educate yourself on how you can take a particular example or experience and then try to broaden your educational experience out of that, so you can start to understand how to appreciate the editorial process beyond that N of one you have of that one paper. So if you already have those interests, then just ask lots of questions about how you might approach the review of a paper in a different way, you know, minus this piece of data, plus this piece of data, if it were a different journal, you know, things like that, that, you know, where you start to imagine yourself in the position of an editor and ask the questions to gain the information.
Yeah. I had a friend who actually got her PhD, but also took some journalism classes while she was getting her degree. And then she ended up being science editor for Smithsonian Magazine and for Slate. And so I don't know in this particular for a journal if journalism classes would help, but she did take some extra classes to help with her writing and reporting and so on.
And if this question is about becoming an editor for a scientific journal or learning how, like developing editing skills, often universities will have, you know, magazines that they release, sometimes for students, sometimes for the faculty and alumni. You could always get involved at the university level as well and develop your skills there.
I think this is a good point to end, and to give a plug to Researcher Academy, who is actually facilitating this webinar. Researcher Academy at elsevier.com. A lot of free to follow modules with certification in there, how to become a reviewer, how to format your paper, how to find the right journal to submit your paper to. A lot of the tips that we have in these modules have come from editors like yourselves, working with, you know, all of the different journal subject areas, and just knowing what is important for an editor when a paper is submitted to that journal. What are they looking for, and making sure that you as an author have the best chance of succeeding past a death reject and out into peer review. So I would suggest that anybody who's looking for tips in getting into the journals, whether that be as a reviewer, just learning more about the kind of thinking that goes on behind the running of a journal as far as the editors are concerned, to visit researcheracademy.com. And just to finish up today, to thank my panelists, some of who are not here today, and also to thank Matt for joining us today for the Q&A. The session will be distributed, social media. It will be on the Brain Research Journal homepage. So some of these questions we will be following up on after the webinar and hopefully be able to answer them. There's quite a few more that have come in since. So again, thank you for everybody who has joined us today. Apologies again for the technicalities. And yeah, have a good evening, have a good afternoon, have a good morning. Thank you.
Right, thanks.